Hello and hello everyone, welcome to class 12 biology. In this video I will be talking about biological evolution and mechanism of evolution, and then in the end of the video I will tell you about Hardy-Weinberg principle. So talking about Darwinian theory of evolution, there are two key concepts. So there are two key concepts in Darwinian theory of evolution. They are natural selection and branching descent. So we have discussed about natural selection before. We will discuss further. What is natural selection? So in the natural selection, I told you that some organisms are better adapted to survive in an otherwise hostile environment. Adaptive ability is genetically inherited, and nature selects the fit individuals or those with better adaptability. So that was the gist of natural selection, right? And I also gave you some examples regarding rabbits and all those things. So I will give you one more example over here. Let's say we have an original population over here in a dark environment where there's lava rocks. Let's say we have so many rabbits, and those rabbits are dark in color. So due to some reason like mutation, one light brown rabbit population develops. But the thing over here is the selective pressure is different. So the selective pressure over here is that in this lava rock conditions, the black rabbits, the dark rabbits, they are well camouflaged, whereas the light brown rabbits, they are not well camouflaged. So they will be easily picked off by predators like falcons, so predatory birds. So their population will remain very less compared to the dark population, the dark variation. So the population variation arises. I have told you over here that it can be due to mutations, but Charles Darwin didn't know that. He said that there are variations within the population like this, and due to natural selection, the ones which are better adapted to the nature, they will be selected. The ones which are not adapted to the nature, they will be, or to the environment, they will not be selected. Now if we change the situation, and bring this rabbit population to a grassland environment, what will happen is now the situation has changed, and the advantage that the black rabbits had in the dark lava environment, lava rock environment, it loses that advantage. Now the advantage goes into the favor of the light brown rabbit, which now it can camouflage within the grassland environment, and gradually, due to selective pressure, the same predator, what happens is the majority of that dark rabbits, they will be picked off by the predator, and slowly what will happen, the light brown rabbit will outbreed the dark rabbit. So that's how new varieties will arise, right? And slowly, if we keep these two environments separate, what will happen is this light brown rabbit will slowly turn into a new species. So that was the gist about natural selection, right? So now if I tell you from now itself, there is no inherent superiority regarding the fur coloration, right? It's not that the black fur rabbits, they are superior to the light brown fur rabbit, right? There is no superiority. It's just the chance event that they get advantage in the lava rock conditions, whereas over here you can see that the situation, when the situation is changed, when the environment changes, the advantage shifts to the light brown rabbit. So that's the main concept regarding the natural selection. Now if we talk further about natural selection and the appearance of new forms, Charles Darwin has also said that, and we have also observed that the rate of appearance of new forms is linked to lifespan of the organisms. So for example, if you take a bacteria, so the bacteria, they can divide within minutes, so their lifespan is really short. So when a bacteria is grown in a medium, in a normal growth medium, we get bacterial colonies, and we get different bacterial colonies based upon varieties. So there are varieties within the bacterial colonies. I have shown in color code like blue, red, and green. So what happens is in the normal growth medium, you can clearly see the population dynamics over here, right? And later on, if we change the growth medium, if we put antibiotics in the growth medium, what happens is, since antibiotics are toxic to the bacteria, most of the varieties, so most of the blue varieties, they die off, and green varieties, they completely die off. But look at the red variety, right? The one which is in red, which I have shown in red, the red bacterial colony, it now starts to outgrow the blue and green, right? The green is already extinct, whereas the red one, it has increased in number. So this has happened due to the change in the medium. We have added antibiotics, so that's why the population dynamic has changed over here, right? And the red bacteria, the bacteria which is shown in red, the bacterial colony which I have shown in red, they have outbred the blue and green varieties. So this can be, this we can call it as the antibiotic resistant variety. So in this one, we have in this particular original population, we can clearly see that in the original bacterial population, there were antibiotic resistant varieties, but this did not give them any clear advantage over the others, right? So their population remained low. But when the antibiotics were added to the medium, what happened was, now they have the advantage. The antibiotic resistant bacteria, they have the advantage, whereas the other bacterial colonies, they died off, they thrived, right? So they outbred the others. And slowly, in due course of time, what will happen, the variant population, it will outgrow the others and it will appear as a new species of bacteria, right? So for bacteria, it can happen within days, right? This evolution, the change, right, can happen within days because the lifespan of bacteria is short. But if we take example of other higher organisms like birds, mammals like us, it is said to take millions and millions of years because our lifespan is much longer than the bacteria. So that is about the natural selection. And over here, I want you to know that this type of natural selection is triggered by anthropogenic action, right? So the natural selection has occurred, but the natural selection was triggered by anthropogenic action. The appearance of the new varieties, right? The appearance of new varieties, of antibiotic resistant varieties, it was due to human beings adding antibiotics to the medium, right? So this is due to anthropogenic action. Anthropogenic means human induced action. Okay, so this will also hold true for the appearance of insecticide resistant mosquitoes which appears, right? You can read about some historical aspects of use of DDT, right? Why DDT was introduced. So DDT was introduced because there was a problem of mosquitoes, and mosquitoes, they spread various diseases like malaria. So in order to control mosquitoes, they used pesticides, and pesticides like DDT. So later on, they realized that it was impossible for us to get rid of mosquitoes because the DDT resistant mosquitoes, they arose, right? And you can clearly see that now the new forms of mosquitoes have arisen due to natural selection, but that natural selection was triggered by anthropogenic action. We were the ones who added DDT to their environment, and due to that, those which were resistant to the DDT, they got selected, right? So anthropogenic action is one of the mechanisms over here. Now let us discuss about types of natural selection. So how many types of natural selection are there? So there are three types: stabilizing, directional, and disruptive. So stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive selection are three types of natural selection. In your textbook, this particular diagram is given. So when we discuss one by one about these three types, you will understand how to interpret this particular diagram. So let's take the first one. So the first one is stabilizing selection. The first type of natural selection is stabilizing selection. So the definition goes like this: when selective pressures select against the two extremes of a trait, the population experiences stabilizing selection. Now let's take an example. So this example shows that we have the original robin population. Robin is a bird which lays blue eggs. So we have an original robin population distribution graph shown in blue, right? And this is the red one is after natural selection has occurred. So you can see clearly over here that the selection pressure, it works against the two extremes. So those robins which lays less than 4 eggs and those robins which lays more than 4 eggs, they are negatively affected by the selection pressure. Whereas the ones which lays about the robin population which lays about 4 eggs, they are naturally selected. Why it is selected is because if robin lays more than 4 eggs, what happens? The chicks will become malnourished. The parents will have problem feeding the chicks, and therefore the chicks will die off. And the another thing is, the other extreme is, if the population, if robin lays less than 4 eggs, let's say 1 or 2 eggs, what will happen? It will result in no viable offspring, because offsprings, they tend to die of other diseases and things, right? So the offsprings won't be viable. So those robins which lays less egg and more egg, they will be negatively affected by the natural selection, whereas those robins which lays about 4 eggs, which is the optimum number, so they will be naturally selected and their population will increase. So you can clearly see that the bell curve has changed its shape after the selection has occurred. So this is the first type, the stabilizing selection, in which the selection goes in favor of the trait which is between the two extremes. So the second type of natural selection is directional selection. So for directional selection, when selective pressure selects in favor of one extremes of a trait and against the other, the population experiences directional selection, right? So in directional selection, what happens is, out of the two extreme traits, one extreme trait is favored by natural selection against the other, right? So that will result in directional selection. So the directional selection, we have already studied that, right? Regarding industrial melanism, we have discussed about that in natural selection. So in directional selection, you can clearly see that this was the original population, right? In the original population, the black or the dark melanic form of the moth was less in number, whereas the peppered, the light variant or the typical variant was more in number, right? So this was more in number. But later on, what happened after industrial revolution? What happened? Due to pollution, the black moth, they got advantage. They were well camouflaged within those dark environment, and they were less hunted by the predators, and what happened? The population of the black moth increased. So you can see that the graph, it shifts towards the black moth population side. So this is called as directional selection. So one extreme is favored over the other one. So that is called as directional selection. And finally, we have the disruptive selection. In this one, what happens? The selection pressure act against individuals in the middle of the trait. So this is just like the stabilizing, this is just the opposite of the stabilizing selection. Now what happens over here is, the original population over here is, there will be more white rabbits. So we have more white rabbits in the original population, whereas the variants of this particular population, the black and the gray, right, gray white rabbits, they are less in number initially. But after natural selection has occurred, what happened to the graph? You can see the shape of the graph, right? It looks like a camel hump, right? So in this one, you can clearly see that after natural selection has occurred, the black and the gray and white rabbit, their population has outnumbered the original white rabbit population. So this is called as disruptive selection, right? This is disruptive selection, in which the selection pressure act against the individuals in the middle of the trait distribution, right? So I have given this is just a hypothetical thing. Okay, so this is just a hypothetical example, just to help you in understanding the disruptive selection pressure, the disruptive selection type. Okay, so I hope you understood the three types of natural selection, and I hope that you will be able to explain this particular diagram that is given in your textbook, that is figure number 7.8. And this particular diagram, it tries to describe the three types of natural selection: the stabilizing selection, the directional selection, and the disruptive selection. So these are the three types of natural selection. Now moving forward, in your textbook, it is given that Darwin's idea of natural selection might have been influenced by work of Thomas Malthus. So who was Thomas Malthus? Thomas Malthus was an English economist, a prominent English economist, and he had written an essay on principle of population. So Darwin, he read this particular work of Sir Thomas Malthus, and it is said that the work of Thomas Malthus, it influenced his idea of natural selection. So let's see what Thomas Malthus wrote about population, human population, right? So Thomas Malthus, he proposed Malthusian theory of population, or Malthusianism. It is an idea that population growth is potentially exponential, while the growth of the food supply or the other resources is linear, right? So in simple terms, you can see this graph over here. it says that the growth of population is exponential. It means the population grows really fast. If the human population is allowed to grow at its optimum rate, the population grows at an exponential scale. It grows really fast. And if you look at the resource growth, right, if you look at the resource growth, the red line, the growth of the resources or the food is linear. It grows at a much slower rate compared to the population. So what happens at one point when these two graphs overlap, right, and these two lines overlap, at this point what happens is the human population far exceeds the food resources available. At this particular time, Malthusian catastrophe will occur. Malthusian catastrophe is nothing but the competition among the population for the limited resources, right? And this competition will lead to bringing the population down. So what will happen at this particular, since he was an economist, he said that those people who have more money, they will survive, whereas those people who have less money, those people who are poor, they will die off during Malthusian catastrophe. So when Darwin read about this one, his work influenced him in a way that in nature also the population grows at exponential rate, and in nature the resources are limited, so there is competition. There is competition within the population and among the populations for the limited natural resources, and this will cause the competition, right? This will cause those individuals who are not fit to perish, right? And those individuals who are fit, they will get naturally selected. So the natural selection idea was inspired by the work of Sir Thomas R. Malthus. In his book, he wrote about Malthusian theory of population, right? So that is about Malthus. Let us now discuss about the second key concept of Darwin's theory of evolution, that is branching descent. Right? What do you mean by branching descent? It is defined as the process by which new species originate from single common ancestor. In this particular picture, we can see the sketch drawn by Charles Darwin, and at this particular point, he realized about he was thinking about the branching descent concept, right? And you can simplify this particular diagram in this particular manner. You can say that there is one common ancestor. From this particular ancestor, two species originated, species A and species B, and from species B itself acts like an ancestor for species C and species D. So this is about the concept of branching descent, right? Our concept of adaptive radiation is also an example of branching descent. We said that in that particular video, I told you that all 12 different species of finch on Galapagos Island, they arose from one common ancestor. So the speciation occurred in a branching manner, right? So this is a branching descent. All these new species, they have descended from one common ancestor. Okay, and if you look at this particular evolutionary tree, all these animal groups over here, they all evolved from one common ancestor over here. But lungfishes, they took a different path, whereas other animals, they took a different path. And later on, these animals, amphibians, took a different path from point 2 onwards, and mammals, lizards, crocodiles, ostrich, and hawks, they took a different path from point 3 onwards, right? So now what do I mean by point 1 and 2? These represents nodes, or the ancestors of a lineage. Okay, we can simplify in this particular manner. Let's say that we have ostriches and hawks and other birds which are more closely related compared to the crocodiles. But if you consider crocodiles, ostriches, and hawks, they are more commonly related, they are more related than lizards and snakes. So this is about evolutionary relationship. From looking at evolutionary trees, by looking at this branching descent, we can clearly see that we can clearly show the relationship between these organisms, right? They are more closely related compared to the snakes, and snakes, crocodiles, birds, and ostriches, they are more closely related compared to mammals. So these points or these nodes in this on this evolutionary tree represents the time at which the species they deviated. Okay, so that is about the evolutionary tree. And finally, we can look at the evolutionary tree in this particular format. This is a simplified version. We can say that all the life forms that we see on the planet Earth, they all evolved from the first primordial form of life, the first life. When the first life appeared, right, about 4 billion years ago, the cellular form, from that particular cellular form onwards, the natural evolution started, and it evolved into different species that we find right now, and it all occurred in a branching manner. So that is called branching descent. Okay, Now let us talk about mechanism of evolution. So when we talk about mechanism of evolution, Darwin's idea about natural selection was, he said that evolution occurred in a very slow manner. He said that there are variations within the population, and among those variants, nature selects those which are fit or which are well adapted to that particular environment, right? So it is a very slow process, and Darwin, he did not explain how those variations came about, right? How those variations arose within the population. Darwin was unable to explain that, right? And later on, Hugo de Vries, he said that the evolution process is caused due to mutation, right? And therefore his theory is called mutation theory or mutationism. In his theory, he said that mutation was the source of novelty. New forms, right? New forms arose due to mutations, and new species, these new forms, they can sometimes become new species instantaneously. Unlike Darwin's slow process, Hugo de Vries said that new species can arise due to mutations, sudden mutations, right? And therefore, it is also called as saltation. Saltation means single step large mutation. Right? Saltation means single step large mutation. Large mutations can lead to formation of new species within or instantaneously in a very short time frame. Right? Darwin, he said that in order for new species to arise, it will take millions of years depending upon lifespan of the animal, right, or the organism. If the organism have a longer lifespan, it will take millions of years for a new species to arise from that, right? So mutation theory, in mutation theory, he believed that it is mutation which causes evolution and not the minor variations that Darwin talked about. But later on, this mutation theory was also discredited, and when people studied about population genetics, the things started to become more clear later on. In population genetics, evolution is said to happen due to disturbance in genetic equilibrium or Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. That is change of frequency of alleles in a population. So let us try to see what is Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. What is Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? We will try to find in Hardy-Weinberg principle. So in Hardy-Weinberg principle, it says that allele frequencies in a population are stable and is constant from generation to generation. Right? The gene pool, the total genes and their alleles in a population remains constant. This is called as genetic equilibrium or Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. What it means is the frequencies of the alleles within a population, it will remain constant. Right? In absence of any evolutionary forces, there is existence of a equilibrium of allelic frequency within the population, that is from generation to generation. Okay, so the allelic frequency will not change in a population in absence of evolutionary forces. And in other words, we can simply write in a mathematical form, the sum total of all allelic frequencies is equal to 1, that is constant. Okay, so let's take a look at the Hardy-Weinberg equation over here. P square plus 2pq plus q square is equal to 1. This is derived from the previous statement which I told you, the sum total of all allelic frequencies is equal to 1. So p plus q is equal to 1. So if we square that up, we get p square plus 2pq plus q square is equal to 1. So let's see what these letters represent, right? Let us try to interpret this particular equation. In this equation, we have allelic frequency of a dominant allele. So let's say we have a gene and it has got two alleles, a dominant allele and a recessive allele. Dominant allele is capital A, recessive allele is the small a. In this case, the allelic frequency of the dominant allele is represented by letter P. The allelic frequency of recessive allele is represented by letter Q. So P plus Q is equal to 1. I told you that the sum total of all allelic frequency is equal to 1. So P plus Q is equal to 1. Now if we square that, P plus Q whole square, if we square that, then we get this particular equation. Now in this particular equation, the P square represents the genotypic frequency of the homozygous individuals, homozygous dominant individuals. In a sexually reproducing organism, diploid organism, the genotype will be composed of two alleles, right? So those individuals who have got homozygous dominant alleles, the genotypic frequency of those alleles, individuals is p square, represented by p square, whereas the genotypic frequency of those individuals who are homozygous recessive, it is represented by q square, and 2pq represents the genotypic frequency of heterozygous individuals. So that is the interpretation of the Hardy-Weinberg equation, and this equation shows the equilibrium, the genetic equilibrium within a population in absence of any evolutionary force. But will we be able to find any population which is not undergoing any genetic any change in its genotypes, right? It is not possible, right? Evolutionary forces is acting upon most of the populations within the planet Earth. So what are the factors that affect Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? So the factors that affect Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium are as follows. It's given over here: gene flow or gene migration, genetic drift, mutation, genetic recombination, natural selection. So natural selection we have already studied about. The natural selection, it selects those individuals which are considered to be more adapted to survive within an environment. So nature selects those individuals who are more suitable to survive within the environment, right? So natural selection will cause allelic frequency changes. And regarding genetic recombination and mutation, obviously they will lead to formation of variations. So this will create new allelic frequencies, right? Allelic frequency will be changed by mutations and genetic recombinations by creating variations within the population. Now these two terms are new: gene flow and gene migration, and genetic drift. Gene flow and gene migration are same, and then we have genetic drift. Let us try to study about them one by one. So the first one is gene flow or gene migration. So what does it mean? Gene flow is nothing but the exchange of genes between two populations. When individuals, they migrate, right, from one population to the other, it will carry its genes, right? So there is a gene flow between two populations. So there will be exchange of genes between these two populations. That is called as gene flow. So what happens over here is, here we have got all these individuals who are homozygous dominant. Here we have all these individuals who are homozygous recessive, right? So what will happen? What will happen when one of the birds from this particular population flies into the other population? It will carry its allele over there, and this will change the allelic frequency in the population of the one which is receiving that individual, right? So when the allelic frequency changes, we say that evolution is taking place. So this will change the allelic frequencies. Gene flow and gene migration will change allelic frequency. And the next one is genetic drift, right? Genetic drift is change in allelic frequency due to chance event, right? Because of chance event. So what, let's take an example over here. We have got these beetles, right? This beetle population. So we have got 5 red beetles and 5 blue beetles. Now let's say because of a chance factor, someone swats it, or someone just steps on a part of the population where there are most of them are blue. So if you see, those 3 blue or 4 blue beetles are killed, and because of that, now what happens later on? What will happen? The red population will be increase in number, right? The red population will increase and the blue population will remain low. So this is due to genetic drift, right? A change in allelic frequency due to a chance event. So chance event can be anything, a forest fire, right, or any natural catastrophe, right? And genetic drift is said to affect small populations, right? Large population, it is very difficult for genetic drift to take effect. Genetic drift is said to take effect on small populations like this, and because of these chance factors, the allelic frequencies will change, right? And that is the second one. And genetic drift leads to something called founder's effect. So what is founder's effect? Founder's effect is the reduction in genetic variation that results when a small subset of a large population is used to establish a new colony. The new population may be very different from the original population, both in terms of genotypes and phenotypes. Let's look at the example over here. So on this particular island, we have the original ancestral population. From this population of butterflies, few accidentally migrates to a new island. So that is a genetic drift over here, right? So due to chance event, what happens? The allelic frequency changes. From this population, some of the alleles they moved, some of the individuals with they move to the new island, and over here they establish a new population, and in this new population the genetic variation will be less, right? So the founder population, will create a new population where the genetic variation will be less. So this is also a change, right? So this effect is called as founder effect. So it says that sometimes the change in these allelic frequencies is so different in the new sample of the population that they become different species. So if you take a look over this particular case, the original ancestor population butterflies, they moved to a new location and they colonize that particular area, then they establish a population, right? So the allelic frequency is different from this one, right? So the allelic frequency, sometimes it becomes so different that these new population individuals, they become a completely different species, a new species. What do we mean by they become different species? If by chance, if we take individuals from this population back to the ancestral population, they won't interbreed, so they are said to have become completely different species due to geographical isolation. So that is, I think I told you that it is allopatric speciation, right? So that is all about the evolution and mechanisms of evolution, right? In the next video we will talk about the brief account of evolution. Thank you.